With the release of Psycho in 1960, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, and of course, Halloween in 1978, the slasher genre was on its way to becoming a staple of American horror cinema. For decades, countless filmmakers have tried their hand at making a slasher, resulting in a litany of iconic movie franchises, spurring from films such as Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, and most recently, Damien Leone's Terrifier films. Hi, and welcome to Studio Cinema Saturday, the show where we review films old and new, the ones that you don't like and the ones that you do. I'm your host, Dalton Sherrill, and today we're going to be taking a look at Damien Leone's Terrifier 3. And I have to say, it feels like it's been a really long time since I've said that. I wonder why. Just starting off with some general spoiler-free thoughts, I thought Terrifier 3 was a very enjoyable, very well-made horror flick. It had just about everything I wanted from the next installment in the franchise. Gore, little bit of backstory, Gore. There's something about a maniacal, demon-possessed clown going around and murdering people during the holidays that truly warms my heart and puts me in the Christmas spirit. But no, seriously, the juxtaposition with the extreme violence and the Christmas lights and the snow and the holiday rituals is actually really unsettling. Speaking on behalf of the film's quality, the Terrifier movies are independent films, and it kind of lends to this B-movie quality in the first two installments. But I really didn't feel that at all with this film. It features incredible performances from the entire cast, and on top of that, the film is visually stunning. Not that the cinematography was bad in the first two by any means, but Terrifier 3 just takes it to the next level, while still maintaining this 80s-90s vibe with the film grain and light halation, which looks amazing in shots with Christmas lights. Not only that, to me, the gore and the prosthetics involved were much more realistic this time around, making it an even more disturbing watch. But despite that, because of Art the Clown's completely unserious attitude towards murder, there are also many great comedic moments. Arriving at the end of my spoiler-free review, do I think you should watch Terrifier 3? Well, if you're into gory horror films with a sprinkle of comedy and you're a fan of the first two, you'll think it's a work of art. Sorry, I'll stop. Alright, so let's talk about that opening scene. In a lot of Christmas films, you have that timeless scenario where the kid wakes up in bed and they hear Santa on the roof, they wake up their parents, they try to get a sneak peek at Santa, so on and so forth. Being a horror film, this dynamic is completely subverted, and instead of pulling presents out of his sack, Art the Clown of Claus brandishes an axe. And we're seeing all of this from the perspective of this little girl. We don't even see Art's face for a majority of this sequence. And in this long take, he's going up the stairs and he begins butchering the girl's family, starting with her brother, who thinks his sister has come to wake him up again. His dialogue is cut off abruptly before we're greeted with chopping and blood-squelching sounds. They don't even show this kill because the sound design in this scene is so incredible, they just allow you to imagine the horrors that are taking place inside that bedroom. And somehow that's scarier. Art then goes into the parents' bedroom and begins to hack away at the girl's father while he's lying next to the mother. The commotion causes her to wake up during the mutilation, covered in her husband's blood, and overall it's just a really unnerving scene. Then the mother attempts to escape, and we get the supposedly unintentional reference to The Shining, in which Art knocks a chunk of wood out of the door, sticking his head in the gap like Jack Torrance.
Here's Johnny!
Then we cut back to 5 years earlier, because if you remember at the end of the last film, this motherfucker was missing a head. We then see Art's body with the head of the police officer that discovered his corpse hop on a bus to join Vicky at the asylum. It's here that his head is reattached, resulting in a murder spree, with one of his victims being none other than Chris Jericho the wrestler. After that, the two return to this abandoned house that serves as Art's base of operations. Art goes upstairs and sits in a rocking chair, and Vicky goes downstairs to bathe in a pool of blood. Then they both seemingly hibernate for the next 5 years. In a film where a killer dressed as a clown, dressed as Santa Claus, uses liquid nitrogen to freeze a man's limbs and break them apart like hard candy, it feels strange calling this a weird scene in the film, but it definitely is. I'm interested to see how it plays into the overarching series going forward. However, I have heard that the rocking chair's inclusion is actually a reference to Black Christmas, but I actually haven't seen that film, so I didn't make that connection. Then we finally see Sienna, played by the lovely Lauren Levera. We then discover that Sienna spent the last 5 years in a psychiatric facility after the events of Terrifier 2. And can we just take a moment to admire Damien Leone acknowledging the trauma that his characters went through? Like, yes, she should be seeing visions of her dead friend that she led to her untimely demise. It makes sense, and not enough horror films do that. Normalize it. When I was watching in the theater, for just a moment I was like, wait, why isn't she spending Christmas with her oh yeah, the mashed potato scene. Not the mashed potato scene. Sienna goes to stay with her Aunt Jess, Uncle Greg, and niece Gabby. And since Jonathan gets sidelined pretty hard in this film, Gabby assumes the role of your main supporting character. However, I do really enjoy their dynamic because Sienna's this cool older sister that she never had who just went away for half a decade, and Gabby's her curious, young, hyper-fixated counterpart. Their relationship feels very genuine, and it's very much the heart of the film. From this point forward, I'm not really going to recap the film, but rather discuss some of the scenes that were my favorite and say a couple things that I didn't like about the film, because there are a few, although not many. However, I've been glazing it for this entire review, so I can say a couple things. Now, let's talk about the scene where Art acquires the Santa costume. I love how sometimes he'll just select a victim and play the fool for a bit. When he first sees Santa Claus, he essentially acts like any kid that's seen an old man with a white beard out in public. So Santa Claus... Then things start to take a turn when Art pisses on Santa's leg, which naturally results in a barroom brawl. Art promptly resolves the conflict by pulling a Glock out, decking everyone's halls except for Santa. Instead, he ties him to a chair, tortures him with liquid nitrogen, rips off his beard, and reduces him to less than human in classic Art the Clown fashion. Really great scene. You're gonna notice a running theme here, but most of my favorite scenes do involve Art. But I mean, understandably so. David Howard Thornton is such a scene stealer when he's playing that mute murdering clown. Later in the film, we see Art go to the mall. Conveniently enough, Sienna and Gabby are also at this particular mall doing their Christmas shopping. And there's this moment where Art stops in front of the store they're in and he's in full Santa attire, including a mask. However, Sienna knows it's him because she can feel his evil presence. And also because of the old-timey Christmas rendition of Clown Cafe, which I very much appreciated and loved. But then Art's like, I got some other bells to jingle, I'll just keep on going. Which leads me to the following scene in which Art essentially plays Mall Santa while the real one's on break. He then just starts handing presents out to the kiddos like the Santa costume disguises the fact that he's a frightening clown covered in blood. It's a little weird that only one of the kids is frightened of Art and that only one of the parents is concerned, but we'll gloss over that. You're just sitting there because there's just this tension that's built up and you're like, alright, what's gonna happen? And then we cut to this kid who's unwrapping his present like, oh boy, I hope it's a PS5 Pro. Terrifier 3 ups the ante with domestic terrorism against children. Nice. Now, the scene that everyone's gonna be talking about after watching this film is the infamous shower scene. But before I go into that, the two characters Art is preying on are Jonathan's college roommate Cole and his girlfriend Mia. To give a brief background on these two, Cole is Jonathan's shithead friend, and Mia is the host of a true crime podcast. And so naturally she's obsessed with the Miles County Clown and anything related. Earlier in the film, she freaks out when she sees Sienna and asks her how she's coping after everything that's happened. And understandably, Sienna goes ballistic. Now, fast forward to later in the film, and Art has made his way to Jonathan's dorm, and when he's going through the hall, he eavesdrops on a conversation between Cole and Mia, in which Mia goes on this tangent about how she'd love to know the feeling coursing through the victims of Art before he kills them, and how she'd just love to know what his breath feels like on her face in her last moments. And this is definitely one of those scenarios of be careful what you wish for, because while Cole and Mia are having shower sex, this happens. Now, despite the climax of the film being epic and gross and everything that's great about it, I think this is the scene that takes the cake for me. Get it? Because Cole's gets sawed in half. And I know this isn't the most gruesome kill job across the three films, but I think what made it most uncomfortable for me is that they're in the shower and they're in their most vulnerable state, they're naked, and then he just comes in and starts hacking them up with the chainsaw. Plus, it doubles as a reference to Psycho if you're like me and count every shower murder as a reference to Psycho. Now, towards the end of the film, when Sienna sees the news story about what happened at the mall, she starts freaking out and telling her aunt and uncle that they've got to go and pick up Jonathan and that they should have their guard up. But of course they're like, Sienna's crazy. However, we will go get Jonathan. Because of this, Aunt Jess gives Sienna sleeping meds, and when she wakes up, she comes downstairs to find Art and Vicky wreaking havoc on what remains of the Shaw family. I mean, for crying out loud, Uncle Greg's decapitated corpse is hanging from the wall in a crucified state. Aunt Jess is tied to a chair, and Gabby and Jonathan are nowhere to be found. And after Sienna gets up, everyone's asking where Gabby is. So Vicky tells Aunt Jess that she has a present for her, and she unveils a cage with a human head in it that's been stripped down to the bones. And at this point I'm like, alright guys, I think you've gone a bit far, but I hadn't yet seen what was to follow. I've got to give credit where credit's due. Like, Aunt Jess's death is clever and creative. Normally you'll see this trope in films of we're gonna introduce heat to make a rat eat through a person, but instead they kind of flip that on its head as well and just stick that giant tube in her mouth and force the rats down her throat. I mean, this is the scene that even made David Howard Thornton gag, and then they just eat their way out of her esophagus. That is disgusting. Like, gross. And it's only after she's dead that Vicky's like, you know what? That's not actually Gabby. And she puts a pair of glasses on the skull. So, this is where I get into what I didn't like about the film. Why was Jonathan killed off? Actually, I have a better question. Why was Jonathan killed off screen? Genuinely, I think this is this movie's greatest flaw. Why would you have a seemingly main character survive Art in the last film, give him character development in which he's conflicted about helping Sienna, or just leaving it all in the past, just to kill him off screen? And for what? Dramatic effect? The screen time that was devoted to Vicky masturbating with a piece of glass could have just as easily been a Jonathan death. Just saying. Nonetheless, the fight between Sienna, Vicky, and Art is pretty cool. However, I do have one question. How is it that Gabby, this preteen, is able to go and acquire the flame sword during the events of the film, and also put it inside the present for Sienna to use? Damien, I've got some questions for you. But I mean, it is a magic sword, so whatever. But man, I sure am glad Vicky died. I hated that. At least Art is funny. But when Vicky dies, her disgusting corpse morphs into a portal to hell that Gabby falls inside. Because of this, Sienna goes to save her, resulting in Art's narrow escape out the window. Man, and she really had him this time. Bro was cooked if it wasn't for Gabby.
You are cooked!
Then we move on to this ending in which Art's riding a bus to this undisclosed location with this sorta lights are on but no one's home expression. I thought the reference to the ninth circle in this scene was cool, but all in all, the ending felt inconclusive to me, and it left me wanting more. Which leads me to my only other complaint about the film, and it's that I think too much goes unexplained. I enjoyed the slivers of backstory we're given in the flashbacks Sienna has about her dad, but it's not like we learned anything that we didn't already know besides the fact that he was specifically a comic book artist. And I mean, without being explicitly told, we can kinda assume Sienna's this chosen one-esque protagonist without these scenes. I mean, just look. She's wearing a crown of thorns, which is an obvious allusion to Jesus, and she's fighting the equivalent of the devil. Ultimately, the film raises more questions than it answers. Who was that weird blacksmith that looked like one of the Uruk-hai? Was he making Sienna's Amazonian character's armor? What happened to the little pale girl from Terrifier 2? Did Gabby get sent to hell or the Clown Cafe? Is there much of a difference? At the end of the day, I know most audiences aren't pulling up to the theater to watch a Terrifier film for the story, but I feel like by the third installment, we should know a little bit more about what's at play here. However, I did recently see an interview with David Howard Thornton in which he divulges that Art does have a backstory and that we just don't know it yet, and that gets me very excited for Terrifier 4. Now, it seems there's nothing left to do besides score the film, and I'm willing to cast aside the few complaints that I had about it and give it a solid score. While I didn't review the first two Terrifier movies on YouTube, I rated them on Letterboxd. I gave Terrifier a 6 out of 10 and Terrifier 2 a 7 out of 10, making Terrifier 3 my personal favorite at 7.5 out of 10. The film looks and sounds amazing, features performances you would expect from stars in a big studio film, and manages to tickle and terrify the audience, all simultaneously. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Studio Cinema Saturday, and if you did, be sure to subscribe and drop a like to let us know that you love us. You do love us, right? And while you're here, go check out our other content. We have plenty more episodes of Studio Cinema Saturday and Television Tuesday to tie you over till, well, Tuesday. And if you're looking for something different, we just released 3 new horror short films in the month of October, so go show those videos some love. And as always, we'll see you at the next watch.